present danger to this nation. Now 30 additional seconds.
I grant the gentleman 30 additional seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
I want to thank the gentleman from Maryland, my colleague and my friend, for his leadership on this effort. When we vote on this referral, let us vote as Americans, as I said, not as a partisan issue. You may have the Attorney General in the future. It's not the question of the party of the Attorney General. It is the question of whether or not this Congress is going to provide for equal treatment of all Attorney Generals and all Cabinet officers. Let us vote for this motion to refer and give the committee the opportunity it should take. And let us vote down this motion
Time of the gentleman
if
has
that
expired.
should fail. And let us vote down these motions for contempt. And let us thoughtfully consider the equities of this issue.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
And, Mr. Speaker, I now yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, now my honor to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, an active participant and from the district from which this event sprung, Mr. Gozar.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, finding Attorney General Eric Holder, Jr. in contempt of Congress is long overdue, but welcome news from the American people and especially for Arizonans. As I explained in my recent statement, Mr. Holder has shown his contempt and utter disdain for our constitutional rights, our border, Arizonans, and all Americans. 115 members of Congress agree that Americans lack confidence in Mr. Holder and his department. Every member of Congress should do their constitutional duty and hold the Attorney General in contempt today. The people of Arizona, California, New Mexico, and Texas, who deal with the unsecured borders and violent Mexican cartels on a regular basis, now must also live in fear of these firearms. Some have said that these charges against Attorney General Eric Holder are racially motivated, and I couldn't disagree more. The violent cartels armed by our government have no regard for party ID or race. Throughout our nation, and specifically in Arizona, folks from all political parties and all races are now living in danger of this lethal violence due to the actions of this administration. Make no mistakes about it. Today's vote is to deliver justice and accountability for the Brian Terry family and the over 300 Mexicans who have died as a result of Fast and Furious.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Time's up. I yield.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Yield the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, 30 seconds.
Gentleman's
I thank the
recognized
gentleman
for
for
30 seconds.
yielding. On November 1st, 2009, our Speaker stood on this floor, outraged about the process. We, too, are outraged about this process. And let me quote the Speaker. We will not stand for this. And I would ask my House Republican colleagues and those who believe that we should be here protecting the American people, protecting our Constitution, not vote on this bill. Let's just get up and leave. My colleagues may well follow that advice. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from California.
I yield myself 10 seconds and have no doubt that the gentleman will walk off the floor, but his motion is asking us also to delay into an election getting an answer for the Terry family. I know that is not the wise course, and I strongly support that we do this today. And with that, I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Labrador.
The gentleman from Idaho is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand with a heavy heart in support of today's contempt resolution. It puts us another step closer to holding the Attorney General accountable for this severely flawed operation and his failure to cooperate with Congress. The Attorney General has not only failed to produce all the relevant documents, he has misled this Congress and thereby prevented us from uncovering the truth. So how can the members of the minority say that our investigation is superficial when we don't even have all the documents? When the Attorney General was before the Committee on Oversight last year, I brought to light his historical pattern of willful ignorance, highlighting his lack of knowledge when under oath. He knows nothing, he says nothing, and he seeks for nothing. Never in my life have I met a man more unconcerned with the search for the truth. I've since become even more disturbed by the depth to which Mr. Holder and his allies will sink to stonewall justice. Yes, this is an unprecedented day. I agree with you. But not until now have we had an Attorney General have to retract so many statements made to Congress of the United States, the duly elected representatives of the people of the United States. Let us vote to support this motion for contempt, and I yield my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time both sides have?
The gentleman from Maryland has 6 1/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from California has 11 1/4 minutes remaining.
I grant to Ms. Maloney 2 minutes.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the family of Brian Terry deserves our respect, our condolences, and our best efforts to finish the mission, to put an end to gun violence on the southern border. But instead of going after gun violence, this investigation has gone after the man that tried to stop the gun violence, the Attorney General. Chairman Issa has acknowledged that Attorney General Holder did not know about the gun walking operation. He has acknowledged that the President and the White House did not know about the gun walking operation. Both the White House and the Attorney General have acknowledged that the gun walking operation was a tragic mistake, that it was badly executed, and that it originated under the Bush administration. It was Attorney General Holder that terminated the program and requested an extensive investigation of the operation and how it was conducted. And the documents that they are now requesting in this vast and spurious investigation have absolutely nothing to do with gun walking. If they were really interested in discovering the truth, the committee would have called Kenneth Melson, head of the ATF, as a witness. The chairman refused 10 different requests for a hearing with Mr. Melson. 10 requests. Republicans have not granted one single Democratic witness request in 16 months. Not one. This is not about discovering the truth. This is about politics. This has become an obsessive political vendetta, pursuing a political agenda in a season of unusually ugly politics. If they were serious about ending gun violence, they would do what many ATF agents have suggested and put some teeth in the law. And that is why I authored with my colleagues a bill to make gun trafficking a federal offense and strengthen penalties for straw purchases. This unprecedented contempt citation is politics at its worst, and why this body is held in such low esteem by the
Time. The
public.
gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the statement by the Terry family regarding Congressman John Dingell's criticism of the contempt vote be placed in the record at this time.
Without objection, it will be placed in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sure the gentlelady from New York recognizes that the right of a minority hearing has not been exercised, and that would have answered the questions, as they are well aware, about bringing Kenneth Melson before the committee. That would be their right. They did not exercise their right. With that, I yield a minute to the gentleman from Florida, the senior member of the committee, Mr. Mica.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you for yielding. When the Founding Fathers created our government and established the committees in Congress, they had authorizing committees and they had appropriating committees. In 1808, the predecessor of this committee was established for a fundamental reason, and that's to make certain that programs and funding were properly executed and used by agencies created by Congress. Congress created the law that created the Department of Justice. Congress funded the programs that are under the Department of Justice. It's our responsibility to investigate when things go wrong. And things went wrong. An agent of the United States was murdered with weapons which were funded by the agency that we created. All we have asked for is the documents. All we want are the facts, and we have been thwarted. Eric Holder, Attorney General of the United States, the highest judicial enforcement officer of the United States, has been in contempt, is in contempt, and is showing contempt for the Congress and the responsibility under the Constitution of this important committee of Congress. I urge adoption of a contempt resolution against the Attorney General.
Has expired.
Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, I grant the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise in strong opposition to these contempt resolutions. I spent 6 years as an assistant U.S. attorney, and I have great admiration and respect for the hardworking men and women of the department. I have great respect for our Attorney General, who I think has been a superb Attorney General and is a man of great integrity. And I, like most Americans, would like to know about the facts of Fast and Furious, about the problem of guns crossing our border, the horrendous violence at the south of our border. But what we do today will shed no light on that. What we do today will not improve the situation in terms of gun violence that's claimed the lives of tens of thousands of Mexican citizens and claims the lives of increasing numbers of Americans. What we are doing today is simply a partisan abuse of the contempt power. 13% of the American people think highly of Congress, and today those 13% are wondering why. What we do will cause no injury to the department, but it will cause great injury to this House. The Justice Department, after providing 8,000 documents in extensive testimony, is now being required to turn over privileged materials. And like all administrations before it, it has reluctantly used the executive privilege to respectfully refuse to provide materials it cannot provide. And so now we are here bringing a contempt motion against an Attorney General, which our committee chairman acknowledges was not aware of Fast and Furious. They don't expect any documents to show he was aware of Fast and Furious, and yet we're going to hold this cabinet official in contempt? That is an outrageous abuse of the contempt power. What will happen when the Congress actually needs to use the contempt power for a legitimate purpose? Will anyone still recognize it? I urge the Speaker to withdraw this motion, as indeed Speaker Gingrich withdrew the motion in his day, and let the parties work this out. We both know, Democrats and Republicans, how this will end. It will end with a settlement in court months or years from now, with the Department providing the same documents they're offering to provide today. Let's end this partisan exercise now.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California.
I yield myself 15 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 15 seconds.
I respect my colleague from California. We came into Congress together some 12 years ago. But the fact is, he talked about everything except the fact that Congress was lied to in a false letter and follow-up statement. 10 months went by, and we're only asking for the information related to the false statements made to Congress during that intervening period, and nothing more. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield to the leader, Ms. Pelosi, 30 seconds. 1 minute, I'm sorry.
The gentlelady from California, Minority Leader, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I commend him for his extraordinary patriotism, for his commitment to upholding our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution, and for recognizing full well the congressional role of oversight of all branches of government. I think we all share that view, that Congress has a legitimate role to play in oversight, and thus your committee has so much jurisdiction, and I respect that. I think we all also agree, I think we all very, very much agree that we are very sad and seek justice for the family of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry. His loss is a tragedy for all who knew him, for all of us who care about him and we offer our condolences to his family. So sad. But that's not what we're here to debate. What we agree upon? What we're here to debate is something very, very large, because it is a major disagreement between the two sides of the aisle here, and I'm sorry to say that, about what our responsibilities are to the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution says it requires Congress and the executive branch to avoid unnecessary conflict and to seek accommodations that serve both their interest. That's how the Constitution guides us. As Attorney General William French Smith, who served under President Ronald Reagan, said, "The accommodation required is not simply an exchange of concessions or a test of political strength. It is an obligation of each branch to make a principled effort to acknowledge and, if possible, to meet the legitimate needs of the other branch." Mr. Speaker, on the floor today, the Republicans in Congress are not making a principled effort to acknowledge or meet the legitimate needs of the other branch. What they are doing is exploiting a very unfortunate circumstance for reasons that I cannot even characterize, so I won't. But I will say this, without any fear of contradiction. The basic premise that this debate is predicated on today is a false premise. It is factually not true. How many more ways can I say that? And so we have a debate predicated on a false premise, and what can that lead to that has any good outcome? It is a situation where we have a contempt of Congress resolution against a sitting cabinet member, which is the first time in the over 200-year history of our country that this has ever happened. Again, what is the motivation? Secondly, and that's why I quoted the Constitution, this motion is not a principled effort to resolve the issue. If it were, we would not be able to measure in hours and days, not even weeks, the rush, the railroading of a resolution of contempt of Congress that the Republicans passed last week and are bringing this week to the House floor. I say this because I took considerable heat myself when we brought contempt charges against two staff people at the White House, Josh Bolton and Harriet Miers, 4.5 years ago. We were asking for some papers. We got nothing. As I say to my friends, not even a wrapper off of a piece of gum. Nothing. Stonewall. Nothing. And yet, our chairman at the time of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Conyers, and our House leadership, Mr. Hoyer and others, kept saying, find a way, exhaust every remedy, so that we do not have to take this action of bringing a contempt charge to the floor of the House. For over 200 days, we tried to resolve the situation. And when we could not, we brought it to the floor, two staff people at the White House. In stark contrast to the rush of 1 week to the next for an unsubstantiated, not even factual charge against the Attorney General of the United States. It may just be a coincidence, I don't know, that the Attorney General of the United States, the chief legal officer of our country, has a responsibility to fight voter suppression, which is going on in our country, that he has refused to defend the constitutionality of DOMA because he doesn't believe it's constitutional, or that has major disagreements on immigration, which falls under enforcement of immigration law. It may just be a coincidence that those are part of his responsibilities. Or maybe it isn't. But the fact is that the chief legal officer of our country and his staff has to spend enormous energy, psychic, intellectual, and time dealing with this unprincipled effort on the part of the Republicans. Just when you think you have seen it all, just when you think they couldn't possibly go any further over the edge, they come up with something like this. It's stunning. It really is. And I don't mean that in meaning it's beautiful. It's stunning. It stops you in your tracks because you say, how far will they go? Have they no limits? Apparently not. And so the temptation is to say, let's just ignore the whole thing, do not dignify what they are doing by even being present on the floor when they do this heinous act. First time in history of our country to bring a contempt against a cabinet officer. You would think they'd be more careful about what they say. But being careful about what they say is apparently not part of their agenda. And so I know in our caucus there's a mixed response to this. They're acting politically. We should act politically. We shouldn't vote on this. I want to vote no. I think members have to make their own decision about that. I'm very moved by the efforts of our Congressional Black Caucus to say that they're going to walk out on this. Walk out on this. And perhaps that's the best approach for us to take. How else can we impress upon the American people without scaring them about what is happening here? What is happening here? What is happening here is shameful. What is happening here is something that we all have an obligation to speak out against. Because I'm telling you, it's Eric Holder today, it's anybody else tomorrow, any charge they can drum up. And the fact is, and has been said, the fact is that the papers that they have seen, they know, are exculpatory. That means there is no blame on the Attorney General, and they know that. And that's why they don't want to bring those responsible for this before their committee, and that's why I commend Chairman Dingell for his leadership in the motion that he will bring to the floor momentarily, a motion of referral, so that we can get to the bottom of this, so that we can see how this happened, so that we can offer some solace to Brian Terry's family, and so that we can have some sense of decency about what should happen on the floor of the House. And when it goes, it seems to me the more baseless the charge, the higher up they want to go with the contempt. The less they have to say that is real, the higher up they want to bring the contempt charge. I have always tried to make it a habit of not questioning the motivation of people. They believe what they believe. We believe what we believe, and we act upon our beliefs. It always interested me that in this Congress somebody can bring something to the floor that is not true. But if I were to call someone a misrepresenter of that information, my words would be taken down. So I guess that gives them liberty to say anything, because it's in the form of a motion. But let's make sure that we all take responsibility for doing the right thing by not letting there be an abuse of power, an abuse of this floor of the House, an abuse of the time of the executive branch, an abuse of a member of the time of a member of the Cabinet who has serious responsibilities to our country. So I urge my colleagues to do what they want as far as walking off. I myself had said that I was coming to this floor to vote against this resolution. I thought it was so wrong that there was no question to take the opportunity to vote no. But listening to the debate, almost unbelievable. Not that what they're saying is believable, but unbelievable that they would say it. And so now I say to those who have a doubt about how they want to proceed, that instead of doing what I said before, which was just to come and treat this as an act of a bill before the Congress, a resolution before the Congress, and express my no, listening to the unconscionable presentation, I want to join my CBC colleagues in boycotting the vote when we have the walkout after we have the debate over Mr. Dingell's. We all take our responsibilities seriously here, and one of them, first and foremost, is to support and uphold, defend the Constitution of the United States. And that Constitution requires the Congress and the executive branch, I'll end as I began, to avoid unnecessary conflict and seek accommodation to serve both interests, the executive branch and the legislative branch. We are not upholding that aspect of the Constitution here. So I urge my colleagues to vote no or no vote, but to seriously reject. And let's hope that this will not be repeated. But I'm telling you, it's Eric Holder one day, you don't know who it is the next, because of the frivolousness which would they treat a serious responsibility of the House of Representatives. It's appalling. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back her time. The gentleman from California.
As I know, the former Speaker of the House knows, the Attorney General is being held in contempt as the custodian of the records for refusing to deliver them, and not because we got to choose how far up or not up to go. With that, I would recognize the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Leader Pelosi seriously questioned our motivations here. Let me be crystal clear what my motivation is. We have a dead United States agent. We have more than 200 dead people in Mexico. We have more than 2,000 weapons that were knowingly, willfully given to the drug cartels. More than 1,000 of those weapons are still missing. Most of them are AK-47s. We have a duly issued subpoena that has not been responded to. On February 4th, 2011, on Department of Justice letterhead, they presented the United States Congress a letter that was a lie. It took them nearly 9 to 10 months to provide that information and say, whoops, sorry. That's not good enough. This is not about Eric Holder. This is about the Department of Justice and justice in the United States of America. And I would hearken back to the June 3rd, 2011 letter that 31 Democrats, brave Democrats, sent to the White House. I read part of this. Quote, "It is equally troubling." Remember, this is about over a year ago.
It is equally troubling that the Department of Justice has delayed action and withheld information from congressional inquiries, end quote. He went on to say, quote, while the Department of Justice can and should continue its investigation, those activities should not curtail the ability of Congress to fulfill its oversight duty. We urge you to instruct the Department of Justice to promptly provide complete answers to all congressional inquiries on this issue.
An additional 15 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 15 seconds.
Nothing's changed in over a year, but I can tell you this. The Brian Terry doesn't have answers. You don't have answers. I don't have answers. I want all the facts. That's what we're asking for today, the facts, all of them. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
Remind the gentleman that this, all of this gun walking started under President Bush.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
And I reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves his time. Gentleman from California.
I'd recognize myself for 10 seconds.
Gentleman.
The distinguished gentleman from Maryland can have an opinion, but he can't have his facts. Fast and Furious was an OCDETH operation that began under President Obama and Attorney General Holder. No ifs, no ands, no buts, and I would trust that the gentleman would no longer make statements that would be less than truthful, and I reserve.
The gentleman reserves his time.
15 seconds. Again, the gentleman puts out statements in search of facts. Thank you. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves his time.
With that, I recognize the former chairman of the Oversight Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding. There's been a lot of hyperbole and a lot of repetition, but a lot of the things that have been said haven't really been factual. So let's look at the facts. Brian Terry was murdered. Hundreds of people have been murdered in Mexico with guns that went across the border. The Justice Department said in February of 2011 they had no knowledge about this, and then 10 months later they admitted they lied. Now, they said they didn't know, and then they said they said they did. Now, I don't know what you call that, but to me it's a lie. Then Chairman Issa tried again and again to get information so we could get to the bottom of this, like the 32 Democrats wanted, and they refused. He sent subpoenas. They refused. They hid behind this being an ongoing investigation, and they couldn't give those documents. We got a fraction of the documents that should have been given to us, but they wouldn't do that. Issa met with the Attorney General's people to try to come to some conclusion, some kind of a resolution of this, so we wouldn't have to move the contempt citation. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And then finally, at the 11th hour, when we knew that we were going to have to move with the contempt citation, the President of the United States issues an executive order claiming executive privilege. Something is funny.
Give the gentleman an additional, yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Something is wrong. There's just no question. Something is being hidden from the Congress and the American people. And no matter how much is being said here tonight, the fact of the matter is we aren't getting the information. A Border Patrol agent's been killed, maybe two. Hundreds of people have been killed in Mexico with American guns that our government knew was going across that border, and the Attorney General has not been giving us the information. The Justice Department has been hiding it from the Congress and the American people, and the President has claimed executive privilege. If that doesn't tell you something, nothing will. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'd inquire on how much time is remaining.
The gentleman from California has 6 1/2 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Maryland has 1 1/4 minutes remaining.
Thank you. I'd ask unanimous consent at this time to place into the record letters dated May 24th, 2012, May 30th, 2012, and June 1st, 2012, all addressed to Elijah Cummings, ranking member of the committee.
Without objection, they'll appear in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now would yield to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford, 1 minute.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a truly sad day. This is not stunning, as I've heard. This is a deliberative process that we've tried to work through. We have a border agent that's been killed. We have hundreds of Mexicans that have been killed. And the fingerprints on all that go straight back to an operation that was done by the federal government. This is a moment to get all the facts, to get it on the table, to find out what happened, and to get it done. Now, we started with a subpoena process over 22 different categories. We narrowed that down to one. How do we get the documents from the time of February the 4th of last year, when the Department of Justice told us one thing, and December when they said, oops, and changed their story? We found out they had not told us the truth, and in that time period when they stalled, we just want the information on that. How did this occur? This is essential because Phoenix ATF had a plan, fast and furious. It was then approved by the U.S. Attorney in that area and then went up the food chain to Department of Justice, where it was signed off. This is not irrelevant. This is essential that we know the process of how this was done. If we're going to fix this problem, we've got to know the facts. Instead, they're being withheld. With that, I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
Continue to reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, point of inquiry, do I have the right to close?
The gentleman from California has a right to close.
Then I will reserve my right to close.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Have any more speakers?
No, I do not.
Mr. Speaker, as the Democratic leader said, there is no doubt that the Constitution gives Congress the right and responsibility to investigate. But the Constitution also requires something else. It requires Congress and the executive branch to avoid unnecessary conflict and to seek accommodations that serve both of their interests. In this case, the Attorney General has testified 9 times. He has provided thousands of pages of documents. He's provided 13 pages of deliberative internal documents, and he is willing to provide even more to meet the recent demands of Chairman Issa. But House Republican leaders are not honoring their constitutional obligations. In fact, they are running in the wrong direction as quickly as possible. It is fundamentally wrong to vote in favor of this resolution at this time when the Attorney General has been working with the House in good faith. I believe this action will undermine the standing of the House, will cement the Speaker's legacy, and will be recorded by history as a discredit to this institution. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from California.
I recognize myself for such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume. How much time is it?
5. Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot talked about here about documents that the Attorney General couldn't give us. These documents under seal would be an example of documents that we should not see except in camera. And we've taken great care to ensure that no one outside members of Congress and key staff have ever looked at them. But I've looked at them, and what I know is that these documents, read by any person of ordinary learning, make it very clear that these wiretap applications read and signed by individuals in the Department of Justice in Washington, you read them, you knew they were gun walking. People will tell you differently. I give you my word. You read this, you know they were letting guns go to Mexico. They knew who the buyers were, who the intermediaries were, who the recipients were, and most importantly, where they ended up. And there were reports in here as part of evidence given to judges in order to get wiretaps. There were evidence that they knew that, in fact, weapons had already ended up in Mexico. That's before Brian Terry was killed. That's where Fast and Furious could have been stopped. That's where people could have been warned. In fact, that's what at a time in which ATF agents in Mexico City, if they punched in the serial number of a weapon found there, they got an error. They did not get meaningful information because that was being blocked. Not by ATF per se, but by the Department of Justice under the auspices of the U.S. Attorney and his bosses. Now, you're going to hear that this began under President Bush, Attorney General McCasey. I'm going to tell you that's just false. What happened in previous administrations with some of the same local ATF agents was they exercised extremely bad judgment. They did things and pushed on programs that I believe were poorly conceived and poorly manned, and as a result, they lost track of weapons repeatedly. That happened, and it was wrong. The U.S. Attorney at the time even declined prosecutions because of failed techniques. All of these were shut down during the Bush administration. President Bush can take no credit for it. He didn't know it. As far as I know, the Attorney General didn't know. And anyone who saw the record of that should say this was wrong-minded. But during this administration, during the time in which the Attorney General and his key lieutenants, including Lanny Breuer, were in charge, they reopened the prosecutions from a failed program called Wide Receiver, and they opened Fast and Furious. Now, I'm the second child in a family. I have an older brother, and I learned at a very young age, you in fact cannot, when you do something wrong, say, my brother Billy did it. It doesn't work that way. You're responsible for what you do wrong, whether it happened before your watch or not. This happened on the Attorney General's watch. But that's not why we're here today. We're here because when we asked legitimate questions about Brian Terry's murder, about Fast and Furious, we were lied to. We were lied to repeatedly and over a 10-month period. The fact is, that is what we're here for. The American people want to know that if you give false testimony to Congress, and the minority leader talked about why is there such a hurry? Why was there 10 months delay? I was sworn in just a few days before this investigation began, and now we're nearing an election, and we don't want to have this during an election. We want to have resolution for the Terry family. The important thing is we know enough to know that we have people who have told us under penalty of criminal prosecution, they have told Congress and their employees certain documents exist, and we've asked for those documents, and we've been denied them. We can't bring Kenneth Melson back in good faith and say, well, we've got to have him in front of our committee. If, in fact, there's documents he says exist, and they do, and they will not be given to us, we want to have those so we can ask the best questions. You've heard earlier that, in fact, we've denied somehow due process to the minority. My ranking member is very capable and has asked for minority days, in other words, hearings exclusively for him. He chose not to do it. When we were having the local ATF and other individuals in early on, all of whom worked for this government, he didn't even ask for any. It wasn't until we asked to have the Attorney General come in based on these false statements and final retraction that he suddenly wanted a previous Attorney General who happened to say, no, I don't want to come. So on that particular day, we would have had to subpoena him to get him in. I have no objection to having the former Attorney General in. I believe that on his watch and his predecessor's watch and his predecessor's watch, and for a very long time, we have not done a good job of overseeing the actions of field agents when it comes to guns. But again, we're here today for the first time in over 200 years to deal with an Attorney General who has flat refused to give the information related to lies and a cover-up exclusively within his jurisdiction. Lies and a cover-up exclusively in his jurisdiction. That's what we're voting on. I urge vote on the contempt on behalf of the Terry family.
Time the gentleman has expired. All time for debate has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
I have a motion at the clerk's desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Motion to refer House Resolution 711. Mr. Dingell of Michigan moves to refer the resolution, House Resolution 711, to the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform with instructions to 1. Hold a bipartisan public hearing with testimony from Kenneth Melson, the former acting director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, during Operation Fast and Furious. 2. Hold a bipartisan public hearing with testimony from William Hoover, the former acting deputy director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, during Operation Fast and Furious. 3. hold a bipartisan public hearing with testimony from the former Attorney General Michael McCasey, who, according to documents produced to the committee, was informed during his tenure that, although efforts to coordinate firearm interdictions with Mexican law enforcement officials in 2007 have not been successful, the ATF would like to expand such efforts. 4. Conduct a bipartisan transcribed interview of Alice Fisher, who served as the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice from 2005 to 2008, about her role in authorizing wiretaps and Operation Wide Receiver. 5. Conduct a bipartisan transcribed interview of Kenneth Blanco, who serves as Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice and also authorized wiretaps in Operation Fast and Furious. 6. Take such further actions as the committee, with full bipartisan consultation, deems appropriate to assure a thorough and vigorous investigation of this matter.
Pursuant to House Resolution 708, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, and the gentleman opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
I yield myself 4 minutes, ask unanimous consent for advisory to extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized and without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to offer this motion to refer so that this investigation can focus on the real issues at hand and to get the facts. I begin by expressing my respect and affection for the chairman of the committee, Mr. Issa, and I want to see a proper investigation, the facts gotten about serious misbehavior and utter incompetence at the at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, called ATF. This is a tragedy. I have had the entirety of the motion read so that we could understand what a real investigation is. I didn't roll off the cabbage wagon yesterday, Mr. Speaker. I chaired committees for over 20 or 30 years, and I have conducted more investigations than any man in this particular body. It is clear that the events here were characterized by dishonest, evasive, and deceitful activities on the part of ATF personnel. I want to find out what has happened. This is not the first time I've crossed swords with ATF, and this is not the first time I have found them engaged in shameful, illegal, and improper behavior. In one instance, I caught them raiding the home of an individual. They shot him in the brains, and they pitched his wife in her underpants out into the hall. Operation Fast and Furious was a highly irresponsible operation that never should have occurred. People on both sides of this aisle agree to that. The American people want the answers, and they deserve to have a proper, thorough, and bipartisan investigation that gets them the truth. My constituent, Brian Terry, wants the truth from the grave, and his family asks that we get the truth. And with God as my judge, they deserve it, and they shall have it if I can get it for them. I've chaired scores of investigations and hearings over 50 years on wrongdoing which have collected hundreds of millions of dollars wrongfully taken from our people and which have caught more than a few serious wrongdoers who have paid proper penalties for their wrongdoing. These investigations were always bipartisan, with both sides of the aisle actively participating and fully informed. The actions of the committee were unanimously conducted and were supported by members on both sides of the aisle. What we see before us does not follow that model, and it brings no respect to this body. As someone who holds the institution here in the highest regard, I find this to be most troubling. Instead of going after the real answers and getting the facts about what has happened at ATF, the majority of the committee has engaged in what appears to be a partisan political witch hunt with the Attorney General as its target. Over the 16-month investigation, Democrats were not permitted to call a single witness to testify. So much for bipartisanship. The American people deserve better than this, Mr. Speaker. They deserve a legitimate inquiry based on facts in which all members of this body can support. Now, this is not a Second Amendment question. I have defended the Second Amendment more than any member of this body, and I have passed member of the Board of Directors of NRA and a life member of that body. We deserve, and the American people deserve, a legitimate inquiry based on the facts. It seems to me there's a simple way to resolve this dispute. First, adopt the resolution. Second, see to it that the Attorney General produces the documents that are currently at issue. And I will actively support the gentleman in seeing to it that those facts and those documents are presented. Second, the House Republicans should give a good faith commitment to work towards resolving the contempt fight. If the documents in fact are consistent with the Attorney General testimony that he never authorized, approved or knew about gun walking, then I think we should consider the matter of contempt resolved. If those documents...
Time the gentleman expired.
I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Speaker. I yield myself 1 minute.
Does the gentleman claim time in opposition?
I claim time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker. I respect the gentleman from Michigan, the Dean of the House, but you're just wrong. There were plenty of opportunities for the minority to ask for witnesses. They chose not to except at one hearing, and then they wanted the former Attorney General. They did not avail themselves of the procedures allowing them to have a hearing, even though they know how to do it and have done it. But more importantly, when you say you represent Brian Terry, you do not. The Terry family issued this statement, which I ask unanimous consent be placed in the record.
Without objection, it will appear in the record.
Among the statements in there are, referring to Congressman Dingell, his views don't represent those of the Terry family, nor does he speak for the Terry family, and he has never spoken to the Terry family. Secondly, his office sent us a condolence letter when Brian Terry was buried 18 months ago. That's the last time we heard from him. Third, a year ago, after the Oversight and Government Reform Committee began its work, one of Brian Terry's sisters called Rep. Dingell's office seeking help and answers. No one from that office called back. Lastly, if Rep. Dingell truly wants to support the Terry family and honor Brian Terry, a son of Michigan, he and other members of Congress will call on the Attorney General to immediately provide documents requested by the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. I reserve the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman reserve his time. The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Michigan.
Well, I was aware of this. I have communicated with the family my sorrow at their loss, and my office is setting up a meeting with the Terry family as soon as I can get back to Michigan. My motion here would ensure that the witnesses the minority has requested, including the former director of ATM during the time of this operation, are called for a full, open, public hearing to assure that the American people get the whole story. I am not here solely representing the interests of the Terry family. I'm here representing the interests of the whole country. And all of the 800, I don't yield to the gentleman, and all of the 800,000 people that I serve in the 15th District of Michigan. As I have said in a number of occasions in the last year, Congress has two choices in their decision making. We can work together and get something done, or we can play political football. I choose to get something done, which is why I have offered a resolution, and if you have listened to what I have had read by the clerk, you will observe that it says we want a thorough, full, bipartisan investigation. That's the way the matter should be done. And members on this side will support the findings of that investigation if the chairman of that committee will permit this kind of undertaking to be begun. I would observe there's a very interesting fact. The contempt resolution is going to give the same instructions to the same fellow who is under contempt. He will simply put it in his pocket, and we will find that this body has been weakened in its dealings with the executive branch.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
I now yield all remaining time to the gentleman from South Carolina, an experienced prosecutor, to close.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a sad day, Mr. Speaker, for those of us who respect the rule of law as the foundation of this republic, for those of us who proudly work for the Department of Justice, for those of us who believe the same rules apply to everyone, regardless of whether they live simple lives of peace and quiet or whether they live and work in the towers of power, prestige, and authority. The same rules apply to everyone. It is the greatness of this country, Mr. Speaker. It is the greatness, the elegance, the simplicity of a woman who was blindfolded, holding nothing but a set of scales and a sword. The chief law enforcement official for this country is on the eve of being held in contempt of Congress because he refuses to follow the law. He refuses to allow Congress to find the truth, the whole truth. For those of you who want a negotiation, a compromise, an extraordinary accommodation, to use the Attorney General's words, for those of you who want a plea bargain, my question to you is simply this. Will you settle for 75% of the truth? Is 50% of the truth enough for you? Is a third? Or do you want it all? Because if you want all the truth, then you want all the documents. If you've ever sat down, Mr. Speaker, with the parents who have lost a child, who has been murdered, and some of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have been there, it is a humbling, emotional, life-altering experience. All they want is the truth. They want answers, they want justice, and they don't want part of it. They want all of it. And I will not compromise, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to finding the truth. Congress is right to pursue this no matter where it takes us. No matter which administration was in power, and no matter what the facts are, we are right to pursue this. And we are wrong if we settle for anything less than all the facts. To my colleagues who are voting no, Mr. Speaker, let me ask this. Can you tell me, can you tell the American people why the Department of Justice approved this lethal, fatally flawed operation? To those of you who are voting no, can you tell the American people how the tactic of gun walking was sanctioned? To those of you who are voting no, can you tell Brian Terry's family and friends how a demonstrably false letter was written on Department of Justice letterhead on February the 4th, and where would we be if we accepted that letter at face value? A letter written on Department of Justice letterhead. That is not just another political cabinet agency. It is emblematic of what we stand for as a country: truth, justice, the equal application of law to everyone. That letter was written on America stationery. That is what the Department of Justice is, and it was dead wrong. And where would we be if we took their word for it? Our fellow citizens have a right to know the truth, and we have an obligation to fight for it, Mr. Speaker. The politics be damned. We have a right to fight for it. I wish the Attorney General would give us the documents. I would rather have the documents than have this vote on contempt of Congress. But we cannot force him to do the right thing, and that does not relieve us of the responsibility for us to do the right thing. Even if the heavens may fall, Mr. Speaker, I want the truth. I want all of it. We should never settle for less than all of it, and we have to start today.
Time of the gentleman has expired. All time for debate on the motion has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 708, the previous question is ordered on the motion. The question is on adoption of the motion. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
On that, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those in favor of vote by the yeas and nays will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote. It will be followed by 5-minute votes on the motion to recommit if offered, adoption of the resolution if ordered, motion to suspend H.R. 1447 if ordered, motion to suspend H.R. 3173 if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
Much of the afternoon, the House has been debating a resolution that would find Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt of Congress for failing to comply with the subpoena issued by the Oversight and Government Reform Committee for documents that are related to the Operation Fast and Furious gun tracking program. For the past few minutes, they've been debating a procedural vote on a resolution, a motion to refer by Representative Dingell of Michigan. His motion would refer the resolution back to that very same committee. This is the first vote. This is 15-minute vote, and the vote on the contempt citation would follow. We are opening up our phone lines for your thoughts on the debate. The numbers on your screen, 202-585-3885 if you're a Republican. Democrats, it's 202-585-3886. Independents and others, 202-585-3887. Please mute your television when you call in, and